years in a row, the AFC Championship games, 1 year to go to the Super Bowl, and we touched on earlier on in our, when we did our AFC West preview, how unfortunate they were even in the Championship game last year not to get over the line and beat the Chiefs again in Arrowhead. And I was looking at kind of some of the off-season acquisitions. I mean, they haven't gone heavy. They haven't been aggressive in free agency. They bring in a couple of players that are serviceable, have been around the league. Orlando Brown obviously has come in, they kind of shore up the offensive line, which when we saw the offensive line that was so great for large parts of last season compared to what we saw the previous year, where Burrow was sacked 13 times in a playoff game, still found a way to win in Tennessee. And then they go into Buffalo with the injuries, managed to beat them, but ultimately kind of caught up with them in the championship game. The amount of times the Chiefs got to Burrow. I mean, is the offensive line a concern? Is it because Orlando Brown is on a significant contract, bear in mind. He's just left the Chiefs. And then the only really kind of player of note they brought in was to replace Jesse Bates, and that's Scott, who's coming from the Rams again. Player has been around, been to play Super Bowls and won a Super Bowl with the Rams. So it feels like they feel like they're there and thereabouts, and they don't need to make major changes and just kind of a few tweaks here and there, and they'll be back challenging for the division and certainly challenging the Chiefs again.
Yeah, and I think, again, you look at it and you say Joe Burrow is there, and when you hear Burrow speak, like he's super smart, he's sharp, and he talks sense, right? Like even today I saw he was up at the podium and he was asked, who's the best quarterback in the NFL? And he rightly said it's Patrick Mahomes. And it's Patrick Mahomes until he's dethroned. And I'm not going to say that I am, because he's got out and he's proved it time and time again. And that's not taken away from his ego. I mean, he equally, a few weeks ago, rightly pointed out, the window is open as long as I'm here. So he doesn't lack for confidence, but he's equally, blessed with self-awareness. And players respond to that. And he's got a sexy new haircut, obviously, and we're going to see what that leads to. But I think for the Bengals, like the Brown signing, it probably it will help to shore up, obviously, that O-line. There are concerns around that, and they've looked to address it. I mean, in fairness, what you would have to say is that the owners have recognized Burrow's talent. They've recognized they need to put the hand in the pocket, and they've done the right thing. So I would say, and I know part of it is around kind of the running game and some of the players that they have lost, but it's probably, again, it's a little bit like the rest of the league. They're going to look at this. It's going to be running back by committee, and it's going to be like the running game is to ensure that Burrow isn't throwing it so many times, but he is a quarterback who, again, even when he talks about the game, he talks about it in different ways. He recognizes that sometimes, and you don't want your quarterback getting hit too frequently, but like sometimes sacks, you have to take it, like, because you're waiting for the opportunity to open up, and sometimes it does, and sometimes you take the sack. So again, he's not taking it for meaningless reasons. Like everything he seems to do on the field is well thought out, and he's very impressive. Zach Taylor has obviously gone through a rough patch early on, I suppose a little bit like Sirianni, but has kind of found his footing. And you look at the coordinators that are there. I do expect, though, like their contract renewals are coming up, right? So there is pressure on the Bengals to take advantage of the fact that they're able to keep, they have all the band together right now. I don't know how possible that will be in the future. And while Burrow is right, the window will always be there. While he's there, the window mightn't be as wide every year. So you want to take advantage of that.
Connor, Colin touched on the bands of T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase, but I'm just going to touch on the running game because Pirine, who was really effective in the second half of last season, moves on to the Broncos. They brought in Chase Brown in the draft, but Mixon always seems to have this kind of off-the-field stuff. It just seems to be one story after another. And at times, he's really effective and he's a great running back, but then he kind of goes missing for some games. If the running game kind of diminishes and he becomes over-reliant in the offense, does that kind of Cause is that a concern? Like one thing that they've struck me is that they're so good at kind of having the right balance offensively, as well as the wide receivers have done. But if the running game kind of goes amiss, and it did for some games last season, and they got away with it at times.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, we talked about this in the context of what, if you want to take the other extreme, what the Falcons are doing and building that 1980s style offense where they just look like they're going to be a 5 yards in a cloud of dust type team. The running game has come back into fashion because teams, and the Bengals are probably to the top of the pile here, have become so good at defending the pass. So, as an offense, you need more of a balance than perhaps was the case even 5 years ago, because defensive coordinators, it's always an arms race in the NFL, and the pendulum is always swinging from one direction to another. And we know the rules are set up. We talk about it all the time to make it so much easier than it ever has been for teams to make chunk plays, make explosive plays, to protect the quarterback, to stop wide receivers being bumped or manhandled too much, all of that sort of stuff that creates the sort of television that NFL execs want people to see and which fans go crazy for. But the running game has come back into fashion because you need to be able to manage the clock as well. And you need to be able to, again, we mentioned it not that long ago in another preview, you need to be able to keep the Patrick Mahomes and the Joe Burrow sitting for as long as possible when you have a lead. Your best chance of doing that is to run the ball effectively. And you take away a key part of your game strategy if you can't run the ball effectively. And if, Joe Mixon isn't at the level that he needs to be at, that is going to be a concern for them. I think there is no doubt that Joe Burrow is a great quarterback. I don't have any hesitation about putting that title on him. Watching that game in Buffalo in the playoffs last year, I mean, he just looks like he's playing the game in bullet time. Like he's, like a John Woo hero from those 90s Hong Kong action flicks. Everything's blowing up around him. The bullets are flying. And it's all in slow motion as far as he can see it. Like the way he steps up in the pocket when things are breaking down alarmingly around him. And as you were saying, Colin, just gives himself that extra nanosecond to find the perfect play. The confidence he has, the way he keeps his eyes downfield, the throws he makes, and those just insane wide receiver core that he has around him. It's so exciting to watch. And they've gone in, and the scalps that they've taken in the playoffs. And here's my one caveat for the Bengals this season. I think if the Bengals get the number one seed in the AFC, they'll win the Super Bowl. I think if you're playing games on the road again, if you've got to go to Kansas City and win, if you've got to go to Buffalo and win, if you've got to go to those tough places and triumph on the road all the time, the odds are just against you. And the Bengals have done their damnedest to push those odds in their favor. And they've come out with some incredible victories, as we've seen in the past two postseasons, and only just fell short in the championship game last year. But the number one seed, I think, is a real prize to be fought for in the AFC, as it was last year, and arguably proved decisive in the Chiefs getting to the Super Bowl in the first place. And getting that from the division that they're in, as we've been talking about for the last half hour plus, is really, really going to be very tough. It is a scrap in the mud, and there's no guarantees with Lamar back and with the Steelers turning up as competitive as they always are, and whatever version of Deshaun Watson we get, if he hits his ceiling, that's no guarantee for the Bengals, and I think that could prove decisive for their chances of actually, taking advantage of the window while it's as wide as it is at this point. They still have a very young core, though, which I think if you look at the sort of the top 5 or 6 players that they have, and I think it was Bill Barnwell did this ranking for ESPN recently, it's remarkable how young the Bengals core actually is. So they don't have to get it done this year. Burrow's contract extension, all of that stuff has to be done, and that obviously is going to change the calculus for future years. So this year is very important for them, but they're not as much in all-in win-now mode as other teams that we've talked about. And I think that slightly, in a funny way, takes the pressure off, even though they're so good that they absolutely should be contending and they should be setting their sights on winning that trophy this year because they've come so close over the last couple of years and because they have Joe Burrow. It's not as immediate a requirement as it is elsewhere. And I think in a strange way, that slightly takes the pressure off them.
Colin, before you bring in a quick point, we're touching on the 4th seed, and it's fair to say, if they had won that particular game, which unfortunately was called off because of the unfortunate circumstances over Hamlin, like they would have actually, the way the season played out, they would have been the number one seeds because they had the tiebreaker over the teams at the time. So it's a very valid point. And that was one of the reasons why they were supposed to be disappointed at the end of the season, because it just didn't go their way. You're probably the one team that kind of were the most impacted by the circumstances. Colin, sorry, you have a point.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Kind of building on what you've just both said, because Patrick Mahomes has never had to play a road playoff game. He only the Super Bowls haven't been in Arrowhead when you're talking about playoff football, and he's 9-2 in Arrowhead in the playoffs, which is kind of impressive. But it tells you the importance of it. The other point, and I would slightly disagree with Connor in terms of the expectation, because I think there's the contract side of things, but there's also the concern. And whilst I agree with Burrow, the window will always be open. The more time that goes by that they don't win it or they're not there, the comparisons to Marino will grow and grow and grow. And that is the concern, that sometimes, that there's no guarantee with any of these things. And that's one of the beauties of the NFL is, we're going into it, and like realistically, genuinely, you could say there are probably 12 teams certainly next year that would feel that they're in with a real shot of it, and there's probably 16 of the 32 that could end up there. Could be a surprise. The Bengals getting to the Super Bowl themselves when they did was a huge surprise. So this is not the Bundesliga, but that's why I think the Bengals have to be wary of I suppose capitalizing on where they are. And even though it is a star-studded AFC, I do think the expectation for them and the hope would be that they get back there, because once you can get that, the questions just build and build and build. And I would have seen it kind of throughout John Elway's career, right? It was always there, in 92, 93, 94, 95. And when they lost to the Jags in 96, it was like, he's never going to do it. This is going to be the curse. This is going to be Marino and Elway. And ultimately, he got over the hump. But until he did, the pressure just builds every year because the expectation is there. So it's something just to keep an eye on. But and it's crazy, right, that we judge players so much just by winning a Super Bowl. Of course, it should be a consideration and it should factor in, but it can't be the be all and end all that how many rings, and that's solely it. I think there are a lot of other factors, but there's no doubt that it is part of the conversation.
Colin reminds me of the advert in which Joe Montana and Dan Marino did after the Super Bowl in the 80s, in which Dan Marino said, "Next time will be my time," when that time never came about, unfortunately. And it'll be interesting to see if Joe Burrow falls into that category or he gets them over the hump this season. Our next episode will be a look at the AFC East, in which Aaron Rodgers is now residing in. So that should be an interesting one. I look forward to your time.
And we will, at that point, have maybe more clarity on Stefon Diggs and the Buffalo Bills, because at the time of us recording this, suffice to say, a day to forget for the team in the Northeast.
Yes, an interesting day with Buffalo. We'll get into that on the next episode. Connor, Colin, as always, I really appreciate your time. Thanks.